Well, good evening, everyone. I hope we've got people joining now. I can see a few coming in. We'll give people a few minutes to join. And while we do that, I'll just acknowledge that where I am, I'm meeting on Wiradjuri country. So I want to acknowledge our first Australians and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also express my gratitude for their ongoing care of country for as long as humans have lived here. I'm really excited tonight to have our guest speakers on board, and I'll introduce you to those as we go along. We've had a little change to the lineup. So Lisa McLean from New South Wales Circular wasn't able to join us, but I'm super excited that we have Jodie joining us from Jodie Brickhout. Now, Jodie, am I pronouncing that correctly? Brickhout?
Oh, it's good enough. Brickhout, yeah.
Close enough. Thank you. And we have Professor Andrew Blakers and also Colin Liebman. I'll come to each of those speakers as we go. Now, I'm just going to share my screen with you briefly to show you what has been going on today. So today I'm really excited that we launched Regenerate Calare. So this is a vision for Calare and a planning project that we want to kickstart. It's come about from all the discussions that we've had throughout the electorate over the past 18 months about what the changes people want to see, the opportunities, etc. It's also come about through speaking to various experts, like some of the ones that you're going to meet tonight, and realising the huge opportunity that we have in Calare. Particularly as Professor Blakers will outline to us the fact that we, of all the federal electorates in Australia, we're in the top 2 to benefit from the transition to renewable energy. So that in itself is an amazing opportunity. So just briefly, and there's been a bit of media about this today, which you can all look up, and I'll be sharing it on our social, so I won't take up too much of our time with that. But the Regenerate Calare plan, as you can see from the outer circle, community consultation and local and regional planning is key to this. And some of the pillars that we want to make sure encompass the plan are abundant renewable energy, as just mentioned, circular economy, which is what Jodie's going to talk us through, and there's huge benefits with that. New manufacturing, and the big opportunity there is obviously with an abundant supply of renewable energy, what can we do in terms of new manufacturing? World-class education, because we've got universities within our electorate, which is such a huge employer and a pillar of the community. Tourism, arts and culture. Obviously, some areas of Calare are thriving in that way, but others have got huge potential yet to be tapped. Affordable housing and living really links into some of the solutions there, really link into what we're talking about tonight. Sustainable agriculture, a big part of the piece of doing what we need to do to reduce our emissions by 2030, and also huge opportunities for our farming communities to benefit from some of those solutions with decarbonisation and carbon markets. And decarbonised transport. And I'm super excited that we've got a great leading Australian expert to help us out on that issue. So stay tuned to that space. So I'll stop sharing that screen now and come back to introductions. So the first person I would like to introduce to you all is Professor Andrew Blakers from the Australian National University. So Professor Blakers is Professor of Engineering at ANU. In the 1980s and 1990s, he was responsible for the design and fabrication of silicon solar cells with world record efficiencies. He was lead innovator of the PERC silicon solar cell, which has 90% of the global market. Cumulative module sales of $136 billion, and is mitigating 1% of global greenhouse gas emissions through displacement of coal. Professor Blakers engages in analysis of energy systems with 50 to 100% penetration by wind and photovoltaics supported by storage. So Professor Blakers, thank you. And my goodness, you are one person who's going to be able to sleep at night in terms of what you've contributed to the global decarbonisation effort. But take it away. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Okay, I'll share a screen. Hopefully it works. Did that work?
Yep.
Good. Right, so I'm going to talk briefly about 100% renewables and the implications for Calare. So first point is that solar and wind won the energy race. So net new global capacity additions in 2021 are shown on this slide. So the yellow is solar, and that's nearly half. wind is nearly a quarter, and everything else, that's coal, oil, gas, nuclear, hydro, geothermal, bio, solar thermal, get crammed into the last quarter. So solar and wind are what people build when they want new generation capacity. And in Australia, it's 99% solar and wind. So Australia is right leading the world. So this is a graph of showing that. This is the number of new watts per person per year of renewables for a bunch of countries. So the bigger the bar, the faster your country is decarbonising its electricity system. And so Norway, Netherlands, Sweden, and Australia are out in front. And Australia is particularly important because we are way out in front in terms of solar. We've got twice as much solar generation per capita as the number 2 country, which is Netherlands, and more than twice as much as Germany, which is the number 3 country. So Australia really is a pathfinder. And that is because of the compelling economics of solar and wind. And the compelling economics are no better demonstrated than the electorate of Hume and Calare. So I'm going to talk about why these 2 electorates are the best renewable energy zones in the whole of Australia. So this is a map of the wind regime in the Lithgow-Goulburn area. The redder, the better. And it's quite obvious that there is a lot of wind in these 2 electorates. It's really, really good wind. The solar is also pretty good. So by European standards, it's fantastic. By Australian standards, it's pretty good. The further west you go, the more sun you get. The fact that we're west of the Blue Mountains means that we have much better sunshine in Calare and Hume than along the coast. And between solar and wind, Calare has got a vast renewable energy resource, the equal of anywhere in the country, but it doesn't end there. Calare has great transmission. Now, it's really hard to get new high-power transmission built because each transmission line goes through hundreds of properties and the social pushback is sometimes difficult. But Calare's already got 3 transmission lines close by. One goes from Lithgow down through the Blue Mountains into Sydney. Another goes up the Hume Highway from Goulburn into the Sydney district. And the third is a ring main that runs from near Goulburn through the over the top of Lithgow, more or less, and around to the Hunter Valley. And this means that the solar and wind that we generate in Hume and Calare can actually get into Sydney without waiting for new power lines to be built. This is quite unlike the other new renewable energy zones that are being talked about in New South Wales, where new transmission has to be built. And it's hard and it takes time. And Calare already has it. So great wind, great sun, great transmission, and it doesn't stop there. Great pumped hydro storage potential. You need a lot of storage for a high solar wind system because the sun and the wind are variable. In particular, overnight, you need storage for solar. And this is a map of some of the off-river pumped hydro systems in the Lithgow district. So the light blue is the upper reservoir, the dark blue is the lower reservoir. The little red dots are on the tunnel route between the reservoir pair. The redder the dot, the better. And you can see that there's lots and lots of reservoirs. There's about probably 300 or 400 times as many potential reservoirs in Calare as it would actually need to service a 100% renewable Calare system. And these reservoirs can be built west of the Blue Mountains so that solar and wind that's generated in Calare and further north and west can be stored during the day in these reservoirs and then pumped down through these constrained transmission lines into Sydney in the middle of the night. So solar power going into Sydney in the middle of the night from Calare reservoirs. Just focusing in a bit closer on a bunch south, about 25 kilometres south of Lithgow, 10 of these reservoirs would be enough to support 100% renewables for the whole of Australia. And there's just dozens and dozens of these really good sites in Calare. It's just a matter of getting rid of the 99% worst ones and only choosing the very best 1%. And they're all small and they're very numerous and they're all outside national parks. So you can see the tunnel route in the lower part of the picture between the upper light blue reservoir, which in this case is on farmland, and the lower dark blue also on farmland. And the separation is just a few kilometers. The height difference is about 600 or 700 meters. It's really, really world-class pumped hydro reservoir sites. So just talk briefly about the amount of water required for this. The amount of water needed to support 100% renewables for the whole of Australia in these pumped hydro systems is about 40 or 50 gigalitres. This is a very small fraction of the total amount of water that is used in Australia. This would be needed over a period of 20 years. And once it's in the reservoirs, it goes round and round a circle for 100 years, which is the lifetime of the reservoirs, if not 200 years. So the water consumption is really quite modest, and it's not going to be taking water from farmers. It's taking water, small amount of it, into very high value infrastructure that directly benefits the electorate of Calare by enabling more solar and wind. So Calare really is possibly the best renewable zone in the whole of Australia. Great wind, great sun, great transmission to Sydney. That's the #1 point, and great pumped hydro. So Calare might actually pick up 5% of Australian solar and wind. And that would be something like 20 gigawatts once the energy transition is completely fulfilled. That's 20 gigawatts of solar and wind in Calare. Mount Piper is 1.4 gigawatts. It's a much bigger opportunity than the Mount Piper coal power station. This is billions of dollars per year, thousands of permanent jobs in Calare because of its location, transmission, solar, wind, and pumped hydro. So what are the economic opportunities? Well, somebody has got to build the rooftop solar, the solar farms, the wind farms, the transmission, the pumped hydro, and the battery storage, and these have to be replaced every 30 years. So it's an ongoing build, operate, refurbish, and replace. Sort of like painting the harbour bridge. By the time you get to one end, you have to start again at the other. And farmers have to lease the farmland for all of the above and continue their farming in the usual way, but receive a second cash crop, if you like, from leasing land, small amounts of their property for all of this infrastructure. And you can go through a little approximate costing. The fact that Calare is that virtually all of this will be in the 50 rural electorates, and none of it, very little of it, in the 100 city electorates, because the solar farms, wind farms, transmission, pump hydro has to go into rural electorates, means that we're talking at least an average of 7 or 8 billion per rural electorate. But Calare is 2 or 3 or even 4 times better than the average. So it could easily pick up $15 to $30 billion in investment every 30 years. This is a seriously large economic injection into Calare. So thank you for that.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Professor Blakers. And I could see some questions coming through. So we'll just take a couple of minutes to and see what we can do. And I just want everyone to have stuck in their head the words that we are one of the best renewable energy zones in the whole of Australia. That's something to remember. And also that figure of a $15 billion economic opportunity. I believe from my previous research about the current value of our economy, that would be doubling the current economy in Calare. So indeed, you are right, Professor Blakers, it's a massive economic opportunity. So I think one question that I've seen pop up a couple of times is about, one's probably easy question is noticing that you talked about off-river. What is it about off-river that we need to understand?
A lot of people, including myself, will bitterly oppose any more dams on rivers. We don't need them. The fact is that 99% of Australia is not on a river. You don't need rivers to build pumped hydro, you need hills. And Calare has a lot of hills outside national parks. So you may as well go to the hills, you build 2 reservoirs a couple of kilometres apart and 600 or 800 metres height difference of a couple of square metres each. And suddenly you've got a 50 or 100 gigawatt hour pumped hydro system, which is a third the size of Snowy 2.0 and a fifth of what Australia needs to provide enough storage to support 100% renewables, with no dam in sight. No rivers need to be dammed, all outside national parks. And there's so many sites that if there's a problem with one site, you go over the hill and find another one.
And on that note too, because I know there's a couple of sites within Calare that are a little bit controversial at the moment because people are worried about impact on nearby rivers. So what makes one site better than another? I mean, what's the ultimate site in terms of, not jeopardizing water security, for example?
Well, the ultimate sites, from a technical point of view, have large height differences between two reservoirs and closely spaced so the tunnel is short. They should not intrude on national parks and protected areas. They're all small anyway. I mean, a 50 gigawatt hour pumped hydro system, this is a seriously large energy storage system, will occupy about 400 hectares and be worth $50 to $100 billion investment. These are really serious investments. And Calare happens to be, if you like, sitting on a vast coalfield, if you like, but it's not coal, it has to be solar and wind. Now, a lot of Hunter Valley electorates have benefited from sitting on coalfields. Well, they're the losers now because that's not where the good solar and wind is. The good solar and wind and pumped hydro and transmission is in Calare. Calare is going to make a lot of hay from transition to 100% renewables. Amazing.
And obviously this opportunity is not just going to fall into our laps, though. We need to make it happen and make sure it happens. So thank you so much, Professor. I think we've got lots more conversations that we as an electorate need to have with you to understand the best way to bring this forward. But thank you so much for that presentation. So it's very exciting.
A pleasure.
And now moving on to our next speaker, Jody. Thank you again. And I just have to say to the audience, Jody has been so helpful today. She's jumped in with only hours of notice to take over from Lisa. So I really appreciate that, Jody, and love to hear from you. And we'll obviously have a lot of questions for you as well.
Great. And I've just taken a moment because Andrew's slides are so good. So I'm actually going to share just a few slides to get across circular economy in a nutshell a little bit. So my name's Jody Braku. I'm coming to you from Ghana country in South Australia, but I work nationally on the circular economy questions. And I'm on the board of New South Wales Circular. So while I don't know your area terribly well, I've been involved in a lot of different regions that are really investing in circular economy to really recapture jobs and economic opportunity in their region. So I was just going to share a few things to explain what we mean when we talk about circular economy, because quite often we come from thinking about waste. And at the moment, there's a lot of questions about waste to energy and, recycling and things like that. And that's part of it, but it's really not the whole thing. So when we're talking about circular economy, we're thinking about the waste that's in the entire economic system. And it's basically anything that's undervalued. So you can think about the waste that ends up in your rubbish bin, but you can also think about the waste of your car that's being parked for 90% of the time, or offices that are sitting there empty. So council offices that could be used for other things. So how can we get more value out of all this infrastructure that's sitting around us by design, and how can we do that as a community? It's a really interesting question. So when I talk about circular economy in a nutshell, just to make it as simple as I can, I talk about it as keeping stuff at its highest value by design. So we're talking not just about materials like plastics and metals and things like that we hear about every day in glass, but we're actually wanting to keep our assets and infrastructure and our products and then their components and then their materials at a highest value. Because as we make things, so as we dig things up out of the ground, as we assemble components and make products, we're adding value to what they're worth, right? So it's when we buy things off the shelf or when we invest in a building or a car or things like that, that's worth a lot of money. And it can be worth more money if it's sold secondhand and things like that. But if we throw things in the bin, or really do this to kind of take, make, use, dispose type model, we're losing all that value out of our communities and out of our economies really quickly. And when we think of Australia, we make most of our stuff overseas, so they're getting all the added value, and then we're just selling it here and we're using things and they're going to landfill. We're losing out on all that value in our economic system. So some of the things we talk about in terms of trying to keep value within our community communities and within our economies. So we try to extend the life of things. So make things and build things and buy things so that they can be repaired, so they can last longer, that we've got the skills in our community and the businesses in our community that can repair them and keep things functioning well. And then we can refurbish and resell things. We can remanufacture things. So that's a really great opportunity to onshore manufacturing. And then finally, recycling. So recycling is a part of it, but it's really kind of the lowest value, which is why I really wanted to pull out a few slides just to get that across. I just wanted to flag that this is a massive opportunity, and all around the world, different geographies are investing and trying to figure out how to do this, what it means for us, what the economic benefits are, what the employment benefits are. So this latest study down here, the 2021 study by KPMG in Australia, flags a $210 billion benefit here in Australia, transitioning to a circular economy. I'm not into these big numbers because I find that they don't mean much to a community like Calare. Like, it depends what actions you're putting in place, but I think it's useful to know that around the world studies are going on to try to understand this, and they're showing that there's economic opportunities, there's employment opportunities, and also this can cut greenhouse gas emissions as well. Now, I just want to share a photo with you because I was talking to Kate earlier today, and I was actually based for 13 years in France. And I know when I talk about France, everyone sees the Eiffel Tower and very glamorous things, but this was my office where I worked. It was in a place called Lossonguel, which is in the sort of northern heartlands close to Belgium. And it's an old mining town. So we were very proud of these. We called these coal hills terrier. And these are the highest coal hills in Western Europe, and we used to climb them and be very proud of them. So we were sitting in this region that had just been devastated. The last coal mine, this was one of the last ones, had closed in the 80s. So everyone's grandparent worked in the mines. And then there was a lot of heavy industry, motor vehicle manufacturing, things like that. And that was starting to slow down as well. And so this region just was investing so heavily in its economic future with a really piercing understanding of how important it is to create long-term jobs that make sense for the environment and for the economy. So in different regions like this in Europe, you've got real local communities investing in these kind of ways of creating value in their economy because they know it's going to make sense into the future. I just want to share that photo because it's not the normal France that most people see. That's all I had. Kate, do you want to ask some questions from there? I didn't want to sort of talk too much.
No, I'd love to. Thank you. And sorry, everyone, I was so keen to get on and hear what Jodie had to say that I forgot to give Jodie her proper introduction. So I'm going to just do that now, and then I'm going to hit you with a question, Jodie. So I just want to let everyone know, Jodie Bricu is a globally recognised expert in circular economy. So thank you for being here. I feel really privileged that you're with us. With 2 decades experience working in the industry, research and policymakers in Australia, Dubai and Europe. Jodie's undertaking a PhD on high-value circular economy approaches with the University of Adelaide, and is a board member of New South Wales Circular, a member of the Victorian Government Circular Economy Innovation Advisory Committee, and the Australian Circular Economy Hub's Metrics Working Group. She has trained 400 professionals in circular economy approaches, hosted 3 international conferences, and been engaged by federal, state and local governments, universities and companies big and small to develop circular economy projects and strategies. Wow, you've been very busy in this space, Jodie.
Yeah, it's all I do.
And Jodie, that brings me to I guess a question that we need to know. I mean, we're sort of thinking about, us as an electorate and how we're represented and whether governments get these things that we're talking about tonight. If you've done some work with governments, how much are you feeling that that governments get this, whether at a state level or a federal level or even a local level?
I think they're really starting to get it. I think we've all got a real role in getting people across the economic opportunity. Everyone sees the rubbish and recycling questions because we see it, piling up in our rubbish bins and things like that. It's very visible. But if you go up the chain and have a look at what this means for how materials flow around our economy, that sort of flips things a little bit, and that wasted value that's inherent around us, that starts to make sense for politicians and especially industry, actually. So I get a lot of questions around whether the government should be leading, and I think it should. But I've come from working in Europe for more than a decade, where governments are a lot stronger, right? Governments tend to have more of a paternalistic, you know, they really get in there and do stuff. So I'm a bit in the middle of, yeah, government should lead, but I'd love to see it happen, but I don't believe it's going to happen in the short term, to be frank. But actually markets are leading this so much. The big corporates in Australia are getting asked questions by their investors. Around the world, this is moving. China's on it, Europe's on it. So, you know, it's all happening anyway. All we've got to do is jump in there and learn from what's going on elsewhere and make it our own, and we can reach some fantastic opportunities from this.
Well, that's great to hear you say that, because it really, you know, as part of Regenerate Calare, this plan, the whole idea is to have a community-led project and to be consulting with community the whole way. And I guess that leads me to my question for you. And this might be a bit of a tricky one for you, Jodie, because I realise with every project there's detail and there's nuance, and I'm not giving you any of that. But we do have a particularly controversial project in Calare at the moment, which is a waste-to-energy incinerator. Sorry, is that too hard? Maybe we can just do top level.
No, that's right.
Discussion. And so the concern is, you know, whether that in fact is a circular economy or is not a circular economy project, and you know, what can we do if it's not, or if it's not entirely circular? What can we do better? Yep. With waste rather than incinerating it? Okay,
so I like to talk about, so there's, you know, in that perfect future that we're trying to get to, you know, hopefully there wouldn't be any incinerators, right? Everything would be designed to cycle perfectly, but we're not there yet. And we actually have major transition issues to get there. So I get the need for waste to energy as a transition step, but it's really important that if it's going to happen and where it's going to happen, we need to treat it as a stepping stone and not a means to an end. So we don't want to be creating these big machines that we have to feed forever into the future. What they can do, and what I've seen them do well in Europe, is create zones where a lot of stuff comes and is channeled to its highest value. So I've seen waste to energy facilities that are run well, and that there's lots of different recycling and reuse activity that flows into them. So it's not trucks just going and tipping out into an incinerator. It's actually quite an ecosystem of everything kind of being picked out that it can before it gets to that incinerator. The other thing is, so incinerator is a yuck word as well. There are really sophisticated forms of waste to energy. So you need to look at how much is being pulled in and how much. So I kind of sit on the fence a little bit. I understand the need for them in a transitional sense. And also I'm really scared that once you build them, you've got to feed the beast. So I think it's really key for the community to put in place the rules that are required and to set up the infrastructures, or even like social enterprises and things like that around it, that, you know, once you've got a mass of goods and products coming to a central point, that's actually a really efficient way to kind of pick and get things to their highest value as well. So if you can create that kind of energy around it, I think it can be okay, but with lots of caveats and with lots of really active participation of community and government.
Yeah, I think that's the key for us in Calare, is that the community is obviously very concerned about this, so we need to be consulting with them every step of the way. Jodie, thank you so much for that. We will just move on now, just keeping a bit of an eye on the time. And I would like to introduce everyone to Colin Liebman. Colin, thank you so much for being here. And I'm not going to forget your intro. I'm going to give you that now. So Colin Liebman is a developer of wind, solar and battery farms. He's an engineer with 30 years of renewable energy experience, starting in the UK in 1990 with a wind turbine manufacturer. He is the founder of several renewable energy businesses and has worked in the UK, Europe, New Zealand and Australia. He's responsible for operating wind farms and solar farms in New South Wales, Victoria and Queensland. His current most advanced projects are an 80 megawatt solar farm near Parkes and a 350 megawatt wind farm near Tamworth. Wow, Colin, you have had such amazing experience, and it's so good to have someone here on the panel as well, you know, because, you know, a lot of the opportunity is you know, partnering, I imagine, with private sector. So it'll be great to get your perspective as someone who's in that space. Thank you.
Thank you for having me tonight. I'm going to sorry, hopefully my internet, is that my end or your end?
I think it's at your end, maybe, Colin.
Okay, I'll persevere. Okay.
Yes.
So I'm going to talk more in some more detail about the opportunities. If the NBN is going to let me.
We can hear you.
Okay, I'll persevere, Kate. To somewhat more granular level of the opportunities, and acknowledge Professor Blaker's extraordinarily valuable strategic work, so I would like to confirm that the opportunity is enormous. My renewable developments is a relatively small. The way is that large international to develop and build these projects, small and local and with lots of experience, can do things with green power and energy. Energy of renewable capacity, which is the same as Australia's entire generation. They intend to triple. They're going to invest 150 billion euros in new capacity by 2030. That's just one of the companies that is investing in Australia at the moment. So our current project with Enel, as you mentioned, Kate, is an 80 megawatt solar and hybrid farm at Parkes. One of the interesting things about, so now more energy than it produces. And one of the interesting things is that we're seeing business energy attracted to that region. So there's already a new pet food manufacturing business, which is up at Parkes. There's recently a US recycling business project, and they're going to employ 100 people. Interest from battery mineral processing, new mines, and these manufacturing jobs in the region, you know, they're significant in numbers, and these are really the dividend that result from cheap and clean energy.
Colin, if you can hear me, we might just turn your video off. I think we can do it from this end. We can still, and hopefully we'll just hear you a bit more clearly because it is jumping in and out a little bit. Can you go ahead now? Okay.
So I'll keep moving, Kate. So the first message is the opportunity is enormous, like Calare. So I'll do scale up from about 32% renewable energy to 100%, or even 300%. The system we currently use for generating energy was a relative number of generators distributing energy to the regions and the cities. The system of the 21st century will have multiple generators distributed. There will be hundreds network, and the system will need to accommodate about 25 new projects every year, only connected one every 5 or 10 years. So the system needs updating with some urgency. There are two burning platforms. The first is the climate change catastrophe. And in the week that the budget was handed down, the IPCC released their latest report, and the language in that report was alarming in relation to the urgency of the need to decarbonise. The second burning platform is that coal generators are leaving the system because they are no longer economic. We saw Origin's announcement in the last couple of months that they are bringing forward the retirement of Eraring. when Eraring leaves the system, we'll lose 2,800 megawatts of capacity. That's 30 projects the same size as our project at Parkes. The second message is that we need national direction, and we need that direction to modernise our system, and we need it to, in order to effect the change to a clean energy system with some urgency and to make that transition as smooth as possible. So what does the 21st century system look like? Clean energy system look like? Well, the answer is it's quite complex. It will include various technologies: wind, solar, hydro, biomass, and others. It'll include short and long-term storage. There'll be grid-connected batteries. There'll be batteries connected at the home, behind the meter, and coordinated centrally. And there'll be long-duration storage, such as pumped hydro storage that Professor Blakers has told us about. There'll be other storage technologies as well. The generators and the storage will be geographically diverse. They'll be right throughout the system. So a couple of questions. Can this new system deliver low-cost energy? Well, the answer is yes. As Professor Blake has told us, all of the new capacity that's being connected in Australia and around the world at the moment, almost all of it, is renewable. And the bottom line is that renewable energy, wind and particularly solar, is the cheapest way to generate electricity. New renewable projects in Australia are not subsidised. Our project will not be subsidised at Parkes. And the reason that we're getting interest from businesses that would like to buy our energy is because it's a low-cost supply of energy, and the cost will be fixed for 20 to 30 years. So when they sign up to buy their energy from us, they know what it will cost for 20 to 30 years. And that cannot be true, cannot be said of fossil fuel generators, because their costs are driven by the cost of coal and gas. And right now, the wholesale price of electricity is running at 3 times the long-term average. And that's because of elevated prices of coal and gas. What about reliability? Will we have a problem with the intermittency of wind and solar? Well, the answer is no. The market operator has done detailed planning, including detailed forecasting of reliability. And they forecast that with a highly interconnected grid, with multiple generators located in geographically diverse regions and with diverse technologies, the system will be reliable. We know that when the wind is not blowing in Cairns, it's probably howling in Hobart. When the sun dips in Byron Bay, it's still sunny in Port Lincoln. So that diversity of regions provides you with a smoothing effect, which smooths out the highs and lows of any one particular generator. Add on top of that the storage that AMO is forecasting, and you provide the reliability that's required for a reliable energy system. So I'll wrap it up with the final message, which is that the key to this 21st century system is a highly interconnected grid. It's very difficult building new grid. While some people don't really like wind farms, almost no one likes transmission towers. It takes many years to identify corridors for new transmission lines, to bring the community along, obtain the social license, get the environmental planning permits that are required. These projects take 5 to 10 years. AMO forecasts that we need 10,000 kilometres of new high voltage grid in order to build the 21st century generating system. So we need to get cracking on that new transmission line. So I'll leave you with 3 key messages. The first is that transitioning to a decarbonised grid is an enormous opportunity, particularly for regions like Calare. The second is that we need national direction in order to affect that change. We need a retirement plan for coal generators. We need a transition plan for communities that are affected. And the third key message is that we urgently need to invest in new transmission grid.
Thank you, Colin. And that was, we could hear you once your video went off. So thank you for that. That became very clear. There's a few quick questions that have come through, but I do thank you actually for just reminding us all of the urgency of decarbonisation from the IPCC report. I know that came out when I was in the middle of this whole process that I've been involved in the last few months, and so normally I'm all over that, but I didn't get to see it this time. But I know that each report, you know, one report after the other, it's just getting more and more urgent. So thanks for reminding us of that. Also, just picking up on your point that the new projects like the ones you're working on are not subsidised. That's particularly frustrating, isn't it? And I hear this from people I speak to around the electorate all the time, that, you know, that the fact that we are still subsidising fossil fuel industries to the tune of, is it 10 or 14 million? I can't keep track whether it's billion, sorry. I think up to $14 billion a year is being subsidised there. So imagine, I mean, I'll ask you the question, Colin, you know, what if we were redeploying the subsidies, the $14 billion of subsidies from fossil fuel industries towards what you're talking about, where would you be directing it first?
I'd be spending it on that grid. And then I would allow the market to determine the most efficient generators to connect to that grid. And it's not only a problem of subsidising the wrong industries. The problem is that it sends a very mixed signal to investors. You know, we've got a pipeline of renewable projects which could power this country 4 or 5 times over. There's projects being announced all over the country, both on the grid and off the grid. And the problem is not the lack of resource or the lack of investment dollars to invest in those projects. It's a lack of infrastructure to connect those projects, but it's also a lack of a clear market signal that investors need in order to invest their money for 20 or 30 years. You know, new generation projects are, you know, like any infrastructure project, they're very low return. The investors get their money back over 20 or 30 years. If you think the government is going to build a new coal-fired power station or subsidise a new coal-fired power station or a gas-fired power station in year 2 or 3, you're simply not going to start that renewable energy project because there's too much risk. So that's the problem. It's the lack, not only the subsidising the wrong technology, it's the lack of that clear market signal.
Yes, and I imagine also legislating climate targets and the like, which is, I know, what the independent Zali Steggall is putting on the table with her Climate Act bill, would send those signals as well, Colin.
Absolutely, that sends a signal for every you know, institution in the market and every player in the market to upgrade the way they operate, upgrade regulations in order to deliver those short-term targets, and all of those mechanics of the system need to be modernised.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Colin. That's been amazing. We could keep talking and talking, but I've just better keep an eye on our time. Thank you so much, Colin. I would now like to introduce to you Ashley Bland, who happens to be sitting right next to me at the moment. And Ashley is a passionate advocate for regional Australia with 27 years experience delivering on-ground environment and sustainability programs for major corporations and all levels of government. He holds multiple board and advisory positions and is a fellow of the Australian Rural Leadership Foundation and adjunct to at Charles Sturt University. As founder and managing director of Constructive Energy, Ashley is focused on delivering mid-scale renewable projects that optimise local benefits, working primarily within the distribution network on projects with local government and agribusiness. So Ashley's very much working within Calare. So Ash, I'm really keen to hear from you what you'd like to contribute to this discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. Hopefully now if I speak. Right. The best laid plans.
This is the benefits of being in the one space. We can use that.
That's right. The best laid plans, and here we are just swapping over. Look, yeah, no, I have a bit of a perspective to bring in on this based on the work that I'm doing in the distribution network. I think, you know, philosophically, if we go back to John Howard and the renewable energy target in 2000, early 2000s, I mean, that was the market signal. It was like, hey, we're going to do this, and that indeed worked, you know. And then as in Rudd Gillard and the carbon pricing sort of came in, and we really started to develop some inertia within Australia. And then Abbott came in and put an end to all of that. And arguably since that time, we've been in this real trepidation around the market. But philosophically, we still have this idea that the market will fix it. And more than that, you know, we almost rely on that. And, you know, I have some experience in the Murray-Darling Basin, which was interesting because that was a critical resource thrown open to the market. Now, I would say blind Freddie can tell you, if you expect the market to solve all of your problems, the biggest companies with the deepest pockets will use as few people as they can to maximize the resource for profit, a la almond farms, you know. And what happens when you do that, particularly in the case of the Murray-Darling Basin, is you lose the richness and the fabric of the community. An almond farm can afford to pay $900 a meg for water, whereas your, you know, your mum and dad sheep and grazing guys can't, you know, and you actually have a socio-economic change because of that. So you arguably, the economists are happy because the water is going to its most efficient use, but actually we've externalized a whole heap of damage in the community because of that choice. And I would argue that the same will happen in the transformation around renewable energy, unless we get deliberate about it. We'll see big companies coming in, effectively mining our sunshine rivers. Now, I'm not arguing that we don't need that. We absolutely do, because there's a climate crisis. But I think there's room for a smaller scale of project. And one of the reasons I think that is because, well, there's a couple of reasons. One, it's investable. It's a size that people can participate in, and it's distributed. And quite frankly, it really doesn't matter whether you have a 100 megawatt solar farm or 101 megawatt solar farms. It will produce, you know, 100 megawatts of energy. The things that factor in are around efficiency of delivery. And yes, if you put them all together, there is some efficiency with that. But you haven't considered those broader impacts, like, for example, that 100 people could have invested in those 1 megawatt farms. They could have been distributed amongst the network. They could encompass a wider area of geographic conditions, and they could still feed into the network in a very useful way. Today, at around lunchtime, almost half of the energy for Australia came from rooftop solar. Andrew made that point earlier. We have this idea we must, you know, if we've got something we can strap to a tractor, and if we could fix this in one project somewhere, we as our feeble little humans would do it. But actually, that's not necessarily the whole approach. All of that energy that came from rooftop solar, you know, the people invested in that. You and I, you know, put our money on the table. That wasn't billions of government funding. And we dug the Australian grid out of a big hole that it was digging in 2008. Mums and dads doing that. So I would argue that there's a real opportunity within the distribution network. So these big power lines that cut across the countryside eventually get to somewhere and get broken down into smaller, more usable bits of electricity. And that is in a distribution network. It's controlled by different authorities. Transgrid and others control the transmission network that moves big amounts of energy between states. But to get to you and I, or the factory, or the EV, or anything that's going to hook into this renewable energy is going to do so in the distribution network. And that's the one out here that's run by Essential Energy. Now, apart from, say, Cadia, which is a big mine here that uses, 1 or 3% of the state's energy, it connects straight into the transmission network. All of your mums and dads, all your factories, all your EVs are all charged in that distribution network. Now, that is kind of the what would you say, the poor cousin of the energy debate. There's very little investment in that space, which means that, we talk about this wonderful opportunity with EVs, which is true. But if just 30% of people in Calare get EVs, and let's face it, that'll happen easily by 2030. If we get them home at the end of the day and plug them in, it will crash the grid. So, this is an example of the massive level of investment that will be required in that distribution network, just simply to use the renewable energy that we generate, and also as we electrify everything. Let's not forget that, there's a lot of gas we need to replace in not just our homes, but in process and manufacturing. Well, that needs to be electrified. How are we going to get that electricity into those businesses? Because when they were built in the 50s and 60s and 80s and whatever, they were built not necessarily imagining that they would need the demand that they do now. A little case in point is the fabulous Cabonne Council, who have decided, embarked on a plan there to build a mid-scale power plant themselves and use some of the innovation in the retail market to effectively sell energy to themselves. Now, this is a really good little case study, because when we did the application for those guys, they needed a bit over 2 megawatts of generation capacity and about a 3 meg battery. Will mean that those guys as a council and all of their 100 buildings, they can be 100% renewable 24/7. They can pay themselves to buy their own energy. So effectively council becomes a gentailer. How good is that, right? Fixed costs, paying themselves for energy, 100% renewable, cash positive from day one. Great story. When they go to connect to the network, they find that there are limitations within that network that mean that the size of that project is constrained. And I think that's a really clear example of where a government could step in and say, okay, well, for the benefit of the wider community, the people of Eugowra, we'll help remove that barrier so that we can make that sort of model available to the community more broadly. So it's not just council benefiting then, it's the whole community who become investors in this change. And again, just sort of finally to make a point, you can think that all this stuff is dinky-die, but a mate of mine is on the board for New South Wales Farmers, and we looked at the underutilised potential of farming assets. So a farm, that's got a shearing shed, a couple of bores, an irrigation pump, that kind of thing, has quite a lot of infrastructure running to their house or their farm that doesn't work for a lot of the year. Now, if you put 500 kilowatts or a meg of solar on that particular farm with a battery, then you turn that into cheap energy for that farm and an off-farm income for that farmer as well. Now, that if you times that by the approximately 10,000 connection points west of the Divide, that's a lot of energy. That's Liddell well and truly solved with a distributed model that actually returns benefits into the community. So I guess that was the contribution I wanted to make to the thing today, is we can't just think big about this, we need to think small as well. It's been a great honour just to share a bit of a platform with all of these fabulous people, by the way, but I'll now scoot out and let you come in, Kate.
Thank you. Thank you, Ashley. And we've had some really interesting questions come through, and I know we've only got 5 minutes left before we said we'd wrap it up for everyone, but I'll just throw a few out there that I've noticed come in. So there was one, I think it was from Katie, I'll have to go back to it, and it was to Colin, and it was around with the upcoming assets that we will have, like disused coal mines. And I guess we could say the same thing about, in Wallerawang, we have now a disused power station site. What are some of the opportunities you see around those? And one suggestion, which I know I've found fascinating, is a gravity-based energy storage. Is there anything you can comment on those issues? You're just on mute, Colin.
Sorry, Kate. Yes, there are tremendous opportunities, and I guess there are short-term and there are longer-term opportunities. The very short-term opportunity is the grid capacity available at that power station, because that power station Eraring is 2,800 megawatts. So that's an enormous capacity available in that system without having to build any more grid. So wind farms, solar farms, battery storage, which connect in the vicinity of that coal-fired power station, can connect without delay. As soon as that power station is retired. So that's a short-term opportunity. Longer term, some of these other technologies like gravity-based storage are evolving, and they will become economic, and they may well allow the reuse of mines. There's a great example actually, and a lot of people know about this one, is the Kidston pumped storage facility being built in Queensland at the moment, which is reusing 2 gold mine pits, which are separated by about 150 meters, I think. So they're repurposing those pits for the upper and lower storage and building a hydro generator between them. So there are these opportunities to repurpose.
Thanks, Colin. And Andrew, I imagine you've looked at the Kidston example that Colin just mentioned. Is that an ideal pumped hydro site? We talked about what is ideal and what's not ideal.
It's not ideal. It's very, very far from population centres, but it's being built. A central theme of the discussion that's come through is the importance of transmission. And this is where Calare has it, and Kidston in North Queensland doesn't have it. Calare has these enormous transmission assets, and with a bit of finesse, large numbers of solar and wind farms can hook in, and pumped hydro storages can hook into those existing transmission assets and get to work straight away. Right.
So no lag time there, as long as we get the storage up and running. And Jody, I just picked up my ears a bit. We're talking about the gravity-based energy storage. It's interesting that one that I have looked at before talks about having concrete blocks that a crane draws them up using renewable energy, which creates the storage, and then a crane drops down again, and that creates energy. And one example I've seen used a lot of recycled materials in those concrete blocks. So I guess that's a neat, maybe not quite circular, I don't know if it is circular, but it's a neat reuse situation, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's interesting. I haven't heard of that one before. There's always something new that comes up in every talk. But with all this talk of renewables, it is interesting to think about what's going to happen in the next life of them. So what happens to all those solar panels when they come to a cruncher in 30 years as well. So we need to be planning, and it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with solar panels, but actually we need to be planning with all this infrastructure that we're looking at, what happens next round and next round again, and how do we make sure we get all those precious elements back that are in these things that we're needing to create for this new infrastructure to transition us to decarbonize our economies as well. That's a really important issue. I think someone brought up on the chat earlier in terms of solar panels and the future waste aspect of that.
Yeah, it is something that I notice comes up all the time as well. And there was a question I was just looking for, was a great one from you, George, if you can hear me, and I can't see it. I think it was maybe on the Q&A before, but it was a circular economy question, Jody. So I was just going to put it back to you. I think George might have been saying, oh, have I got it?
Was that the one asking about some examples?
Yes, examples of changes that move towns towards a circular economy.
Yeah, and I wanted to actually point to the Hunter Joint Organisation. I'll put the link up on the screen after. They're doing some incredible things that I think are best in class. So really similar to the kind of work I was seeing happening in Europe, where communities are getting together and actually defining problems together and finding solutions together. So rather than a council or a government saying, oh, I've got this piece of infrastructure, I want to make it out of recycled material, blah, actually going and saying, well, what else can we do with this? And bringing community and businesses in to actually create the solution together. Because one other question that came up was about these potential negative or unintended consequences that we have, if we're not looking at these problems more systematically and understanding how this impacts communities, what are the life cycle impacts of what we're doing and what we're investing in, we can have impacts that we don't realize, even when we're trying to do the absolute right thing. And if you're using recycled materials but that are quite polluted, for example, and that might actually damage the environment, that's no good. We've got to get that stuff out because we don't want pollutants recirculating in our environment. So this way of sitting down with communities and with budgets and thinking, how do we better use this public asset? How do we rethink our transport infrastructure? It's really exciting, all the different things that can be done, and even interacting with social enterprise to get things repaired and have resale and things like that happening at a very, very meaningful community level can be quite exciting as well.
Fantastic. And that just reiterates to me the importance of having the highest possible expertise that we can bring for our planning project for Regenerate Calare. Bringing the highest possible expertise to the discussion so that we can look at those systemic impacts and minimise harm while we're trying to achieve good, as someone pointed out. I think we've only got time for one more question, and I'm just going to pick up one from Everald Compton. Hello, Everald. Thank you for being here. And that question is there, and I'll throw it to all four of you, and see who wants to answer. Is there potential to produce hydrogen power in Calare using wastewater? Gundawindi is planning to do this. Would anyone like to pick that one up?
I'd like to pick it up briefly. The symbol for hydrogen is H, which also stands for hype. So I think we need to all take a cold shower. Electricity is far more important than hydrogen. You have to produce electricity before you even produce green hydrogen, and the vast majority of the electricity will be used for electricity or to electrify transport, heating, and industry. Hydrogen will be used to replace hydrogen from fossil fuels in the chemical industry, and this is a decade down the track for large scale. Let's get the electricity industry decarbonised first, and then transport and heating, and then we can get onto hydrogen. Let's not get carried away by hydrogen hype and focus on the main game.
Jodie, would you add to that?
Yeah, I'd like to flag something that's a great perspective on hydrogen. I'm not expert enough in the field, but I think something really important to keep in mind is how our nutrients cycle in our economy, especially in rural and regional economies. So actually through our wastewater treatment plants, we've got amazing sources of nutrients that can be going back to the land in different forms as well. And also the potential for the kind of waste to energy, but really sophisticated anaerobic digestion coming out of wastewater treatment plants, where you're harnessing energy and also getting biodigestate that can go back on the land and provide nutrients for our soil. Those nutrient cycles are just as important as many of the other cycles that we're looking at here.
Thank you. And Colin, what about your opinion on hydrogen?
Well, being a generator of electricity, I wholeheartedly encourage all industries which consume a lot of electricity, and hydrogen is one of those. However, I support Andrew's argument. Let's not be distracted by hydrogen when the really easy, ready solution is right in front of us, and that is electrify everything. Electrify everything and convert to renewable energy. And that will get us a long way down the track. That'll give us a decade to work on green hydrogen and get the costs down and solve some of the kind of tricky decarbonising problems in industrial processing. But let's not get distracted by hydrogen.
Thanks, Colin. And speaking of electrify everything, that just reminds me of another person who's keen to help us with our Regenerate Calare plan is Saul Griffiths, who I believe had a book of the same name, Electrify Everything. I think the Australian version is The Big Switch. And I believe, I just clarify with all of you, but I believe that to achieve that, we need to triple the amount of electricity we're currently producing. Does that sound about right?
Yep.
Triple. So it's a huge ask. So I can see why the focus needs to be on generating electricity first and foremost.
Yeah, but we also get rid of all oil, gas, and coal. To do that, we have to triple.
Yes. To make up the shortfall of getting rid of those.
Yeah, because we need to double it to get rid of oil out of transport and gas out of heating, and then to get rid of coal and natural gas out of the chemical and metals industry, and synthetic aviation fuels, we need to add another to make it triple.
Fantastic. And I think the other thing to sort of build into our overall thinking about our plan to regenerate Calare is something that, and Ashley talked about doing things on a smaller scale. I know something that Saul Griffith is pushing is electrifying everything within our own households. So, I think about my household. So when my very annoying old gas stove finally packs it in, I'll be getting rid of that and getting an electric induction. Same with the hot water system. And the idea is if we can just over time do that, as quickly as we can and electrify everything in our house and then run it off solar, each household, according to Saul Griffith's calculations, will save between $4,500 and $5,000 every year on year. So what an amazing contribution to the cost of living pressures that most people are experiencing at the moment. Well, that probably does bring us to the end of our time. I don't want to keep our guest speakers too long. And I just want to thank you so much again. You've all got such amazing experience. And I just really appreciate the time that you've taken to speak to us today. I know everyone has been asking, can we get some more information? So we'll share as much as we can. But huge thanks to you all once again. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We've got some exciting times ahead for us in Calare. It's up to us to make it happen. It's got to be a community-driven project, and we need to push to make it happen. Thanks once again, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Pleasure.